Sometimes the biggest moments, the ones that really make you stop and think, don't come with a lot of shouting or fireworks. Sometimes it's a quiet little thing, a tiny voice in a big room that can make the whole world seem to hold its breath. And when that tiny voice belongs to a little girl, and the person she's talking to is, just the President of the United States, well, let's just say things can get pretty unforgettable pretty fast. It all came down to one moment, one look, and a question that wasn't even on the official program. But hey, before we dive into all the nitty-gritty of what went down, how about we see where everyone's tuning in from? Drop a big God bless America in the comments if you're proud to be here, and let us know which state you're representing today. We absolutely love hearing from our amazing community. Okay, you ready? Let's get into it. The day started like a lot of days do when you're the president, especially a few months into a brand new term. Lots of important sounding meetings, lots of papers to look at, and lots of people wanting a piece of your time. President Donald Trump was, as they say, back in the saddle, and his team was eager to show him connecting with the people. And what better way to do that than with the future of the nation, right? Kids! So they'd cooked up this event, a town hall with tomorrow's leaders. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? The idea was simple. Get a bunch of bright-eyed, well-behaved elementary school kids into a nicely decorated auditorium, let them ask a few softball questions, and boom, instant good PR. Happy kids, a smiling president, pictures that would look great on the news. Easy peasy. The chosen spot was the auditorium of the Northwood Elementary School, a place with shiny floors and colorful hand-drawn posters on the walls about being a good citizen and the importance of recycling. For this special occasion, though, the usual kid vibe was overlaid with a layer of officialdom. Big American flags stood on either side of a small stage. A bright blue banner with "Tomorrow's Leaders Today" in cheerful yellow letters hung above. The lighting was a bit brighter than usual, probably for the cameras. You could smell the faint scent of floor wax, mixed with that slightly nervous, excited energy that always fills a room before something big is about to happen. President Trump arrived with his usual entourage, serious-looking men in suits, a couple of aides with clipboards and perpetually worried expressions, and the ever-present Secret Service agents, their eyes constantly scanning. He was wearing his signature dark suit, a crisp white shirt, and a bold red tie. He moved with that familiar confidence, a sort of Montequier that made it clear who was in charge, even in a room mostly filled with people under 4 feet tall. He waved, offered a few hellos to the teachers lined up nervously by the door, and made his way to the small, slightly elevated platform where a comfortable-looking armchair had been placed for him. One of his chief aides, a man named Henderson, who always looked like he hadn't slept in a week but had his hair perfectly in place, was hovering nearby. Henderson's job was to make sure everything went smoothly, that the president looked good, and that there were absolutely no surprises. Surprises, in Henderson's world, were the enemy. The children, about 50 of them, sat in neat rows on the floor, their legs crossed, their faces a mixture of awe, excitement, and a little bit of wiggly boredom. They'd been prepped, of course. Their teachers had gone over the rules. Sit still, listen quietly, raise your hand if you have the approved question. Ah, yes, the approved questions. Each child chosen to speak had been given a little index card with a carefully vetted question written on it. Things like, "Mr. President, what's your favorite part about living in the White House?" Or, "Mr. President, what's the best way to be a good leader?" Safe questions. Fluffy questions. Questions designed to make everyone feel good. Among these chosen children was a little girl named Maya. Maya was 8 years old, with big, thoughtful brown eyes and light brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, though a few wisps had already escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple white dress, the kind that might be for a special school picture day. In her small hand, she clutched her index card. Her teacher, Ms. Evans, a kind woman with a gentle smile and slightly frazzled nerves today, had picked Maya because she was usually a confident speaker in class, articulate, and not easily intimidated. Today, however, Maya seemed quieter than usual. Ms. Evans sat in the front row with the other teachers, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She kept glancing at Maya, offering little encouraging smiles. She just wanted her student to do well, to make their school proud, and most importantly, to ask the question exactly as it was written on the card. The event kicked off. The school principal gave a short, slightly star-struck introduction. Then President Trump took the microphone. He was in his element, you could tell. He joked with the kids, asked them about their favorite subjects, and told a little story about his own school days, which may or may not have been entirely accurate, but it got a few giggles. He had a way of making even a big, official-feeling room feel a bit more like a performance. "All right," he said, his voice booming slightly through the microphone, even though it was a small auditorium. "I hear we have some very smart young leaders here today who have some questions for me. Who's first?" A few pre-selected hands shot up. Henderson, the aide, subtly gestured to a teacher, who then pointed to the first child. The process was smooth, efficient. A little boy asked about the president's favorite ice cream flavor. Strawberry, apparently, though he also liked vanilla. A very good flavor. The best, some people say. A girl asked if he had any pets in the White House. Not at the moment, too busy, but pets are wonderful, very loyal. Each answer was delivered with a smile, a bit of charm, maybe a little exaggeration here and there. The cameras clicked. Henderson nodded almost imperceptibly. So far, so good. Textbook, PR. Then, it was Maya's turn. Ms. Evans gave her a little nod. "Maya, dear, it's you." Maya stood up. Her legs felt a bit like wobbly spaghetti. The index card in her hand suddenly felt very slippery. All those faces looking at her. And up there, on the stage, was the president. He was even bigger in real life than he looked on TV. She started the short walk from her spot on the floor to the little microphone stand that had been set up for the children. Every step felt like it was in slow motion. The auditorium was quiet, except for the low hum of the lights and the occasional cough. She reached the microphone. It was a little too tall for her, even though it was on a child-sized stand. She had to tilt her head up to speak into it. President Trump was looking right at her, a broad, encouraging smile on his face. "Hello there, young lady," he said, his voice a bit softer now, friendlier. "What's your name? And what's your very important question for me today?" Maya swallowed. Her throat felt dry. She looked down at the index card in her hand. The question written there was, "Mr. President, what is your favorite book to read?" It was a nice question. A safe question. The question Ms. Evans had practiced with her, but as Maya looked at the words, they seemed to blur. Her mind wasn't on favorite books. It was on something else entirely. It was a jumble of things, really. It was the way her mom had been very quiet at breakfast that morning, her eyes looking a little red like she'd been crying. It was a hushed conversation she'd overheard between her parents a few nights ago, something about Daddy's factory and new rules, and not enough work for everyone. Her dad had sounded worried, a sound Maya wasn't used to hearing from her big, strong daddy. She didn't understand all of it, not really, but she understood the feeling. It was a tight, anxious feeling, like when you know a thunderstorm is coming. And now, looking at the president, the man who made the big rules, a different question, a real question, was bubbling up inside her, pushing aside the safe one on the card. It wasn't a question she had practiced. It wasn't a question anyone had told her to ask. It was just there. She opened her mouth, and then Nothing. She froze. The smile on President Trump's face remained. But his eyes, sharp and accustomed to reading people in rooms in an instant, flickered. He'd seen this before. Kid gets stage fright. Happens all the time. Usually a little nudge, a bit of gentle teasing, and they'd snap out of it. "Cat got your tongue?" he chuckled, leaning forward slightly in his armchair. "It's okay. We're all friends here. Take your time." Maya's eyes, wide and serious, lifted from the card and met his, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just stage fright. There was a depth in her gaze, an earnestness that went beyond a forgotten line. She wasn't looking at him like he was a celebrity or a far-off figure on TV. She was looking at him like he was a person, a very powerful person, who might, just might, have an answer to the confusing, unsettling thing she was feeling. The silence in the room stretched. 1 second. 2 seconds. It felt like an hour. Miss Evans was practically holding her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped her own hands. Henderson, the aide, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his smile becoming a little strained at the edges. The only sounds were the faint whirring of a news camera focusing, and the distant, muffled sound of a lawnmower outside the school. President Trump, sensing this wasn't the usual hiccup, leaned further forward, his elbows now resting on his knees. His posture changed. He was no longer the relaxed, jovial host. He was focusing, his gaze intensifying, as if trying to will the scripted question out of her. The pose was almost exactly like the one you see in that famous photograph. Him bent towards this small child, his expression a mixture of paternal expectation and something else, perhaps a dawning awareness that this might not go according to plan. His hand gestured slightly, an open palm, as if to say, "Come on, out with it." "You have a question for me, Maya?" he prompted, his voice still outwardly gentle, but with an undertone of impatience. Or maybe just a desire to get things back on track. "I bet it's a really good one. We're all waiting to hear it." Maya's lower lip trembled just a little. Her hands, still clutching the card, came up towards her mouth, as if to physically hold back the words. Or perhaps to cover her surprise at her own boldness. She looked like a startled fawn, caught in the headlights. The room was utterly still now. The other children had stopped fidgeting. They were all watching Maya, their heads tilted. The teachers were leaning forward. Even the Secret Service agents seemed to pause in their constant scanning. What was she going to say? Was she going to ask about the factory? About why her mom was sad? Was she going to ask something terribly impolite? Something that would make Miss Evans faint and Henderson's perfectly combed hair stand on end? The air crackled with unspoken possibilities. Inside Maya's head, it was a whirlwind. The practiced words, favorite book, fought with the unformed, heartfelt questions about fairness, about why grown-ups sometimes looked so worried, about whether powerful people really listened to small people. She felt a strong urge to just blurt out, "Why does my daddy look scared sometimes?" But she knew, with a child's unerring instinct for what was and wasn't allowed, that this wasn't the place for that question. President Trump waited. His smile was fixed, but a tiny muscle twitched near his eye. He was a man used to being in control, used to setting the agenda. This small girl, with her silence and her searching eyes, was momentarily disrupting that control. It was fascinating, in a terrifying sort of way for his PR team. Then, Maya took a small, shaky breath. She lowered her hand slightly from her mouth. Her eyes never left the president's. And she said, her voice small but clear in the suddenly very quiet auditorium, amplified just enough by the microphone. "Mr. President," she began, and everyone leaned in a fraction more. "Here it comes, the unscripted moment." Henderson subtly reached for his phone in his pocket, ready for damage control protocols. Maya paused, then finished. Is it very, very hard to always be kind? Silence. Absolute, pin-drop silence. It wasn't the question anyone expected. It wasn't political. It wasn't accusatory. It wasn't on the card. It was just a child's question. A simple, profound, achingly innocent question about a fundamental human quality. President Trump, who had been leaning forward, ready to field or deflect almost anything, seemed to blink. Just once, a slow blink. The fixed smile faltered for a nanosecond, just a tiny crack in the confident facade before it snapped back into place. But for that fleeting moment, he looked surprised. Genuinely surprised. He didn't answer immediately. The question hung in the air, echoing in the stillness. Is it very, very hard to always be kind? Ms. Evans let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. A strange mix of relief. It wasn't a disastrous political gaffe. And bewilderment. Henderson visibly relaxed his grip on his phone but still looked wary. What did this mean? How would the president answer that? The president chuckled. A slightly strained sound. He leaned back a little in his chair. Well, Maya, he began, drawing out the name, buying himself a moment to process this unexpected turn. That's a very interesting question. A very thoughtful question. He looked out at the other children, then back at Maya. You know, being kind is very important. It's one of the most important things. And yes, sometimes, when you have a very big job, a very tough job like being president, and you have to make very hard decisions, sometimes people might not think you're being kind. But you always have to try to do what's right. And doing what's right, that's a form of kindness too, isn't it? For the whole country. It was a politician's answer, smooth, circling back to familiar themes of duty and toughness. He hadn't really answered her question directly, not the simple, heartfelt core of it. But he had acknowledged it, wrapped it up in a more comfortable narrative. Maya just looked at him, her expression unreadable. Did she understand his answer? Did she accept it? Or was she still pondering her own, simpler version of the question? She didn't say anything more. She just stood there, small and still, having asked her one unexpected question. Henderson quickly stepped forward, clapping his hands together with forced cheerfulness. All right. Wonderful question, Maya. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. President. Let's have a big round of applause for Maya. A slightly hesitant, then more enthusiastic round of applause broke the tension. Ms. Evans gently guided Maya back to her seat. The little girl walked slowly, the index card with the favorite book question still in her hand, now forgotten. The event continued. A few more pre-approved questions were asked. President Trump answered them with his usual flair. But something in the atmosphere had changed. That one little question from that one little girl seemed to linger in the air. It was like a tiny pebble dropped into a still pond, the ripples spreading out in ways no one could quite predict. The town hall with tomorrow's leaders wrapped up soon after. President Trump posed for a group photo with the children, Henderson making sure Maya wasn't too close to the center, nor too far out. Just part of the group. He shook hands with the principal and Ms. Evans, offered a final wave, and then he was gone, sweeping out with his entourage, leaving behind a room full of slightly dazed children and very relieved school staff. As the auditorium emptied, Ms. Evans went over to Maya. "You did very well, dear," she said, though her smile was a little wobbly. "That was a very thoughtful question you asked." Maya just nodded, looking down at her shoes. She wasn't sure if she'd done well or not. She just knew she'd asked the question that was in her heart, not the one on the paper. And for some reason, That felt important. Later that day, as the news reports started to trickle out, most of them focused on the fluffy, pre-planned sound bites. "President connects with young students," read one headline. "Trump shares leadership advice with children," said another. But a few eagle-eyed reporters and some amateur videographers in the audience had caught that moment of hesitation, that shift in the president's posture, the unexpected nature of Maya's question. On social media, a short clip of the exchange started to circulate. "Little girl stumps president with kindness question?" one caption pondered. Henderson and his team went into overdrive, of course. They issued a statement saying the president, quote, enjoyed the thoughtful and engaging questions from all the students, and that he believes kindness is a cornerstone of American values. They tried to frame Maya's question as just another example of youthful curiosity. But the image of the powerful president leaning down, momentarily silenced by a small girl in a white dress asking about kindness, had a strange power. It wasn't a gotcha moment. It wasn't a scandal. It was something quieter, more human. For some, it was a sweet, innocent interaction. "Isn't that adorable?" they'd say. "Kids say the darndest things." They saw President Trump handling it with his usual charm, a kindly leader patiently engaging with a child. For others, though, it felt different. They saw a child cutting through the political spin, through the carefully constructed image, with a question so fundamental it was almost disarming. They saw a moment where the usual rules of engagement didn't quite apply, where innocence had, however briefly, held power to account in its own gentle way. They wondered if, just for a second, the president had been forced to consider the simple, human weight of her words. Maya, of course, became a tiny, unintentional symbol for a day or two. Some people called her brave. Some called her naive. Her parents, after their initial shock, were mostly just proud that she'd been herself, even if they were a little terrified of any potential backlash, which, thankfully, never really materialized in any serious way for them. The president moved on to other events, other speeches, other policies. The news cycle churned. But for those who had been in that auditorium, or who saw that fleeting clip online and really saw it, the image of Maya and her question lingered. It was a reminder, perhaps, that sometimes the most profound questions don't come from seasoned journalists or political opponents, but from the clear, uncomplicated perspective of a child. And that even the most powerful people in the world can be momentarily stopped in their tracks by a simple query about something as basic and as complicated as being kind. The day ended. The lights in the Northwood Elementary auditorium were turned off. The banners were taken down. But the echo of a small voice asking a big question about kindness remained, a tiny ripple in the vast ocean of public life, leaving everyone to decide for themselves just what it all meant. Phew, what a moment, right? It really makes you think. So I gotta ask you all, what was going through your mind when Maya asked her question? Do you think she was just a nervous kid? Or was there something more to it? And how do you think the president really felt in that moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm super curious to hear your take on this one. And hey, if you enjoyed this story and love getting the inside scoop on these kinds of fascinating behind-the-scenes moments, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ding the little notification bell. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, and you won't want to miss a single one. Thanks for tuning in.